Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first of the new season of Royal Society of Edinburgh Lectures. And I'm pleased to see that we've got a really good turnout for this one. We generally do, and these are advertised on our website, and you can get one of the little booklets at the door, which will tell you when the next ones are. And there's always a really good mix of topics, as we have tonight. This evening, our speaker is Professor Iain Gordon. He's going to talk about the appliance of rural science in Scotland. Iain has recently returned to take up the position of an extremely important position as the Chief Executive of the new James Hutton Institute. Most of you here will know perhaps what that is, but essentially it is a marriage between the Macaulay Institute in Aberdeen and the CSR, the Crop Research Institute in Dundee. And so Iain has the challenge of bringing these two institutes together, I think possibly up to 600 scientists, among the most important environmental scientists in Scotland, if not the UK. So this is an extremely challenging and important task, and we wish him all the best in it. I have to tell you that tonight he will speak with a beautifully, deeply resonant voice, which is just recovering from flu. But it's very nice, I can assure you. So this lecture is the 9th in a series in honour of a very special man, Peter Wilson, who was the first director of the Edinburgh Consortium for Rural Research, and he actually brought together all the diverse interests, first of all in the Edinburgh area, and it now extends very much wider than that, into this consortium of rural research where people actually work together, and it is a highly successful operation. I'm sure Peter would continue to be very proud of it. And he is fondly remembered in this institution because he was a very, very influential General Secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. The buildings which we now occupy represent an extension of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which was essentially negotiated by Peter and by Sir Lewis Robertson, who was then the Treasurer. It was a very, very difficult thing to do, and he committed himself fully to it, and we're very grateful to him and very pleased to have this continuing series of lectures. Iain has had a diverse range of experience, and he's worked in France. He spent some time at the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute, which is one of the constituents of this new institute, then went to Australia to the Commonwealth Science Industry Research Organisation, and has returned from sunny Australia to sunny Scotland in Aberdeen. So I think I think we should probably just note that the term James Hutton was lived from 1726 to 1797, and he was, many people would say, a founder of modern geology, and really was one of the first people to think of the earth as a living system, not just a dead system of rocks and seas and mountains and rivers, but a living system. So that's all the background is knitting very beautifully together for this talk. And welcome to Iain.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Actually, you've given most of the talk already. Thank you for coming. Sir John, Mrs. Bunny, Wilson, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Edinburgh Consortium for Rural Research and the Society of Biology. It is a great honour for me to give this the 9th Peter Wilson lecture. And I will be croaking. I apologise, as I said, obviously returning from sunny Australia to sunny Scotland, there is a cost, which is to getting the flu. So I've got my water here, so I hope I can manage to keep going for the next 14 minutes or so. As I said, it is truly an honour for me to give this lecture this evening. Peter Wilson was a remarkable man. He clearly was a very dedicated agricultural researcher. He also was quite extraordinary in terms of the way in which he was able to bring people together for common causes, and we've already heard about one of them that he did here for the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And I think what he also was someone who was very keen for his science to make a difference to the world in which we live, and to have it applied in the context that he was interested in agriculture across the world. And so my presentation this evening is really trying to reflect the ways I think in which we, as people who are interested in science that is applied to real-world issues, are able to do that more effectively. I was also intrigued to see in the biography of Peter that he spent time overseas, I think in East Africa, in Kenya, was it? Uganda. And also he spent a while with you in Trinidad, I think in the early 60s.
13 years.
13 years. So he spent some time in Trinidad as the professor of agriculture in Trinidad. Now, I also was brought up in the West Indies, actually, in Curacao, a Dutch West Indian island, just north of Venezuela, not that far away from Trinidad. But I was actually a lot more interested in fish. This is me here on the left. This is a quote from Peter from the John Hammond Memorial Lecture that he gave in 1994. I'll read it to you. Days are long gone when the sole emphasis of agriculture centred on self-sufficiency for a nation at war. In those days, consideration of the environment, endangered species and more extreme aspects of animal behaviour were luxuries the country could not afford. All this has changed. Ethical and social attributes of animal production are now overriding importance, and we ignore them at our peril. The emphasis here, I think, is someone who is saying that agriculture does not just sit by itself. It actually sits within a world which is changing around the expectations that there are for agriculture and the rural environment in which agriculture takes place. And I think for that, Peter, when he said this in 1994, was very forward-thinking. There's we now are in a world in which there's great demands on agriculture and the land in which agriculture is being produced. On the 31st of October this year, the 7 billionth person was alive on the planet, a baby born in India. I think there's actually some controversy about exactly where that person was born. The BBC says it was in India, so we'll take that as read. So there's now 7 billion people on this planet. We're expected now to be able to have land producing the agricultural products to feed 7 billion people. We're predicting now that between 2030 and 2050, the world's population is estimated to be between 9 and 10 billion people. To feed that, we're expected to produce another 50% more food than there is produced at the moment. There's 50% more energy required. 30% more fresh water will be needed. And this is expected to increase the demand for land for agriculture, energy and water production by about 120 million hectares in developing countries, purely for crop production over the next 20 to 30 years. And this all at the same time as we're trying to reduce the amount of damage there is to what's called our natural capital, that is through soil erosion, biodiversity loss and climate change. And in the face of these demands on land and agricultural production, we have also climate change, which is leading to extremes in terms of flooding, fire and drought. So these are major changes that are happening in terms of the ways in which land is used to provide food, energy and water. And obviously it's not just in relation to those particular commodities, but also the environmental context in which that's happening. So John said, the James Hutton Institute was formed on the 1st of April 2011, and it came from a very significant background, a joining between the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute and the Scottish Crop Research Institute to form the James Hutton Institute. Now, people talk about there being the merger between these two institutes, but actually mergers have been happening across the Scottish Agricultural and Environmental Research Institutes over many, many years. The Hill Farm Research Organisation, which was formed in 1954, merged with the Macaulay Soil Research Institute in 1987 to form the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute. The Scottish Plant Breeding Research Station joined with the Scottish Society for Crop Research in Pentlandfield in 1981 to form the Scottish Crop Research Institute. So there's a long history of mergers, bringing together skills and expertise from a range of different disciplines in order to create an environment in which research can be fostered to develop new ideas, products and innovation for the rural sector. So why James Hutton? As Sir John said again, he was a leading Scottish scientist in the Enlightenment period. He was born in 1726 and died in 1797. He is known as the father of geology because of the work that he did in understanding the Earth as a dynamic system. But his work, he was a true polymath. His work spanned chemistry, medicine, meteorology, geology, botany and zoology. And he owned a farm down in the borders of Scotland in which he used his observations of nature and experiments to try and improve the ways in which he could breed plants and animals and develop new methods for farming his land. So we chose James Hutton as the name for the new James Hutton Institute because of the fact that he was someone who tried to use a keen observation of the land in order to experiment with better ways of making land productive for both food and the environment. The James Hutton Institute has two main sites, one based in Aberdeen and the other in Dundee, but we also have research stations that span across the country. And our research is not just focused in on Scotland. We also have research across many different continents on the planet in collaboration with other researchers. So the James Hutton Institute have 600 staff, 450 of them are scientists, 150 support staff. We also, and this is quite surprising to many, we have 120 PhD students at the James Hutton Institute, and it is one of the biggest research centres of its type in Europe. We now have brought together the skills that there were between the Scottish Crop Research Institute and the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute into 5 key research areas. We have cell and molecular sciences, environmental and biochemical sciences, ecological sciences, social, economic and geographic sciences, and information and computational sciences. These are the foundation upon which our research is based. We have 4 key aims. One is obviously to nurture the research that is in the organisation, to provide excellent skills and facilities upon which our research is based. And we integrate the research from those different disciplines in to generate new solutions to global pressures and demands on land and natural resources. One of the key things that we have as a research organisation is we don't do research in isolation. We do it with the people who are going to be using the research to make a difference on the ground. And so we engage with the stakeholders to develop partnerships that create new ways of supporting evidence-based decision-making. And we deliver our knowledge and innovation to stimulate economic growth and support human livelihoods and well-being that protect the environment and the multiple ecosystem services that it provides. So those are the 4 key aims for us as an organisation. Just to give you some idea about the kinds of things that we do, we work on food security. So we develop new crop varieties. I'll go into more detail on these in a second. We develop new crop varieties that utilise water and nutrients more effectively and deliver improved nutrition to people. And we develop innovative solutions to controlling weeds, pests and diseases to reduce the waste in agricultural production systems. We also work on water security, so there'll be increasing demands for fresh and clean water, and we're looking at improved water management in food production systems to reduce water demand and pollution, and we'll maintain water flows to provide vital ecosystem services. Energy security is another key area for us. with reducing fossil fuel supplies that will drive innovation for new renewable alternatives. And we'll be looking at new energy crops that will be produced from land and people, and also look at new energy sources and how they'll impact on ecosystem services. And finally, as I said, one of the things that's key for us is to safeguard the natural capital upon which many of these securities are based, by protecting the species and ecosystems and retaining their resilience to the future challenges, and restoring the natural capital, that is the soils and biodiversity, to support ecosystem services. And we do that, obviously, in the face of climate change, and we work strongly with government in Scotland on relation to climate change, particularly looking at rural land use change to mitigate against greenhouse gas emissions, and how society, individuals and communities have to adapt to in the face of climate change to provide food, water and energy. So you can see the research that we do within the James Hutton Institute is very much focused upon relevance to the global challenges that there are around the ways in which land and natural resources are used. And that, I think, puts us in a very important position within the research community within Scotland. Here is a diagram which actually comes from the Scottish Government. I've adapted it slightly. On the right-hand side, we have the communities which are using the kind of research that we have. So that's business sector and government and policy environment. We have research which is done in a range of different institutions. That is then, how do we translate that research into its application for policy and industry? If you look at research in terms of going from fundamental through applied, academia within Scotland, overseas and elsewhere sits more on the left-hand side of this diagram. And I think the James Hutton Institute actually spans across, linking in with the universities and academia through to its application into the business and policy world. And it works in conjunction with scientists within agencies and non-departmental public bodies such as SEPA, SNH and others. So the James Hutton Institute has a very much an applied focus on the research that we do, but it links in with others in order to be able to take the best research that's done nationally and internationally in order to make it applicable to the people who will be using it on the ground. And I think the important thing here is for us to be able to say not just that our research is relevant, but actually how it is that our research will have an impact. And I think that requires us as scientists to be to ensure that we engage with the communities of practice most effectively. And here I've just given a little diagram of what I think are the two key things that relate to the ways in which our research has an impact. I think historically we've talked very much around the idea about knowledge transfer. So we as the scientific community in effect generate new knowledge, innovation and techniques which are then transferred over into the communities of practice. I think that it can work in some instances, but my view is that it's actually limited in the ways in which that can be applied. I think we have to move much more towards the idea of knowledge exchange. So that's really a two-way dialogue between the people who will be using the information and the scientists that are working to generate that information that can be used effectively. And I know that knowledge exchange is now becoming part and parcel of both the university sector and ours. The Scottish Government is very much driving a knowledge exchange strategy for the institutes such as the James Hutton Institute. And I'm going to talk through a little bit now about with some examples about how it is that knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer happen within the organisation that I run. And I'm going to go through several sections. So firstly, I'm just going to talk about improving crop potential for producing more food in a sustainable way. One thing about the James Hutton Institute family, we were fortunate through the two legacy institutes to bring in two commercial subsidiaries. One is the Macaulay Scientific Consulting, whose focus is very much around providing analytical facilities for the oil and gas sector. Obviously, it's based in Aberdeen. The other one is Milnfield Research Services, based in Dundee, that is working to, in effect, breed and license the crops that are developed through the scientific research within our Dundee research site. Now, there was some research done by independent economists to calculate the amount of money that was coming out of the research that was being done at the then Scottish Crop Research Institute, how much that generated for the UK economy. And it looked across a range of different sectors. So at our Dundee site, we developed new varieties of blackcurrants, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, potatoes, brassicas, that's cabbages, and broccoli, cereals and barley. As you can see here, that the estimated impact of the research that we do ranges up to about just over 100 million for potatoes, and then blackcurrants, raspberries coming in at between just above 60 million. Overall, it was seen that for every pound of public money that was spent on research within the then Scottish Crop Research Institute, £17 was generated for the UK economy, which equated at that stage at about £225 million per annum from just the crop varieties that were produced within our Dundee site. Now, these varieties have real names, so they're things you can buy in Tesco's and Sainsbury's and other places. So Lady Balfour is the UK's #1 organic variety of potato. Vale Sovereign won Tesco Best New Variety in Fresh Produce in 2008, and we've just produced a new potato from a different species from the one that the traditional potato is produced, called Mayan Gold, which is now on sale in Tesco's, and is actually getting very good pickup. So these are varieties that we all know and consume. Raspberry varieties within the James Hutton Institute are also an important part of what we have. So we have the Glen series of raspberry cultivars. The Glen Clover was produced in 1969. Glen Lion is currently the industry standard in Spain, and Spain is one of the largest producers of raspberries there is in the world. And Glen Ample is the current industry standard in the UK. So again, for soft fruits, the varieties that have been produced in our Dundee site are now being used obviously in the UK and also internationally. We're also developing new varieties, I think particularly to address the challenges, as I said before, about water and fertilizer, improved water and fertilizer utilization. Here we have in the diagram on your left, one of the major challenges is now, in terms of the challenges facing the globe, is around the waste that happens through agricultural production, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus imbalance within the systems. And there's ideas now about the fact that we've reached what we call peak phosphorus or peak phosphate, and that we will start to see limitations in plant production, crop production, because of a limited supply of phosphate, or else that phosphate being available only in certain countries that have possibility of there being problems as far as political unrest is concerned, for example, Morocco. So we at the James Hutton Institute are now developing new varieties that will require less fertilizer, and also developing new means of cropping, providing agronomy systems for improving the ways in which fertilizer is used within systems. And just one of the examples here of the work that we're doing just now is to try and improve the phosphorus use efficiency of potato through the use of markers, genetic markers, in order to assist breeding, to improve the rate, to increase the rate at which new varieties are produced, and therefore those new varieties can come to market. So that's talking about the crops we produce, but those crops have to sit within production systems, and those production systems have to be sustainable. So we're developing sustainable cropping systems. It's seen that intensive crop production systems can be unsustainable because they require constant inputs of things like pesticides to control increased risk of pest production, and they require inorganic nitrogen, for example, to increase yield, and inorganic and other fertilizers. Also, today's consumers demand healthier and safer food, and it's expected, and that they expect the food to be produced in an environmentally sustainable way. And there's talk about this idea about sustainable intensification to increase the amount of crops that are produced in the face of the requirements for the increase in demands that happen through global population increase. And there's a number of different policy fora that have been discussing this in the recent past. I mean, so sustainable policy research. So they're now within the European Union. There's biodiversity measures that are enshrined within EU directives, and realise at national level to increase the agri-environment schemes. There's CAP reforms that are happening that aim to enhance crop biodiversity, to maintain permanent grasslands, to introduce habitat features and support of biodiversity. So the production systems within which agriculture is happening in the European Union is happening within the context of being environmentally sensitive and sustainable. So what we're doing within the James Hutton Institute is to develop agricultural production systems that are based on what's called an ecosystem approach towards sustainable management of crops. So crops are not seen in isolation from the environment in which they're being grown. They're actually seen as being part of that environment. And that ecosystem processes which happen, therefore, regulate biodiversity and ecosystem services. So some of the work that we're doing is looking at ways in which we can develop integrated pest management systems that meet landscape and biodiversity objectives. So the goal of integrated pest management is to achieve sustainable crop protection by replacing pesticides with a combination of biological and technological and chemical methods. So we have done some work across 50 farms across Scotland in which we've compared the effects of production at the field level and landscape in terms of the abundance of weeds and pest insects. And we're also now looking at developing spatially expressive population models that allow us to develop to be able to couple pests and their biocontrol agents in dynamic cropping systems, so that we can now say how can the cropping system be implemented within the farm in order to reduce the amount of herbicides and pesticides that have to be used, and we can use more biocontrol methods. We're also looking at arable biodiversity and how that benefits, how biodiversity can be increased in arable production systems, and it allows us, therefore, to increase the amount of biodiversity that there is without having a negative impact on the amount of crop that is produced. And we're also, in a more practical and technological way, trying to develop systems that reduce pollution from the things like the tram lines, which is when the tractors are in the field, so that it allows us to improve the ways in which we can farm land without causing damage to the soils and the biodiversity. So we're looking at measuring the runoff of sediments and nutrients under different ways of farming the land, and also looking at how erosion is linked to with biodiversity and the loss of biodiversity. So we're trying to develop systems that are more effective in terms of cropping, which allow biodiversity to be sustained within agricultural systems, and therefore also use that biodiversity as a way of reducing the amount of herbicides and pesticides that are required to produce the crops. Now we have at Balrudgery Farm near Dundee developed a centre for sustainable cropping, and this allows us at a large farm scale to develop sustainable cropping systems to enhance biodiversity, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the amount of leaching, and improve soil quality whilst maintaining yield. So we can actually test bed ideas that have been developed within the lab and in the small scale at the field level. So the field scale allows us to look at sustainable crop cultivars for enhancing resource use efficiency, suppression of weeds and pest and disease resistance. The kinds of things that we're now doing at that scale are we're looking at, we're developing sustainable management systems which look at compost additions, undersowing with legumes, non-intervention tillage and weed and pest forecasting. The measurements that we're making include nutrient and carbon dynamics, hydrology, biodiversity, crop yield and quantity, and field margin biodiversity. And this is a long-term experiment. It will run for 24 years and allow us to develop a long-term understanding of how these systems respond to different treatments as far as the management of agricultural systems is concerned. And this farm is now part of the LEAF Linking Environment and Farming, and it's one of their innovation centres, and allows us to then use the science as applied in a farm scale to provide education and demonstration sites. And we have an event coming up this year for LEAF, and we also have an annual Open Farm Sunday in which school children and families in and around the northeast of Scotland can come and see the research that we're doing. So moving up to the next scale, the assessments of Scotland's farmlands. Scotland obviously is a farming nation, and that's one of the reasons why the Scottish Government is so keen and interested in maintaining the rural sector. And part of what we're doing here is not just to look at how it is that we can actually operationalise the work that we do through our field and then out to the Balruddery demonstration farm, but also to look about what's happening in the real world in the farming community across Scotland. So I've talked about this a little bit. We have 50 farms that we're monitoring, in which where we have 3 different types of agricultural activity that are happening on those farms, or organic, integrated, and conventional. And we're examining a range of different environmental and crop production parameters. And we use we constantly are in communication with the farmers to talk about their agricultural practices. And we've been looking at things like the amount of carbon that there is in the soil. So one of the results is that over 50% of the sample farms had less than 3% carbon content in their soil, which is very, very low. And we're now looking at ways in which we can monitor the long-term dynamics of carbon within these systems. And we found that for over a third of farms in Scotland that we monitored, they have conditions which in their soils restrict the growth of roots. So many of the agricultural practices that have happened in the past are actually now limiting the amount of crops that can be produced on these farms. We have within our Aberdeen site developed what's called a land capability assessment for the Scottish environment. The land capability is based on 2 main factors. One is the soil, and the second is the environment. So that we now across Scotland are able to say the capability for a range of different activities that there are. So here we have an example of looking at the across Scotland the land capability for cropping, and land class 1, 2 and 3.1 are the real prime land as far as agricultural production is concerned, and up to class 5 is improvable land. The thing about this data set is that it has been generated from the historical soil sampling that was done, but one of the things we're trying to do now is to get farmers to actually be able to say what the land capability is for their particular land type. So we're proposing to make the land capability assessment available on the web for farmers to get access to their own particular for their own particular farm, and they'll also be able to provide us back with information about how it is that their farm is performing in relation to the assessments which we have been doing, so that we can then, in effect, ground truth the information through an interaction with the farmers to assess their land capability. We're also now developing an iPhone app which will allow farmers to, in effect, take a photograph of their soil and use that in order to be able to assess the carbon content of their soil, so that they can get real information on the carbon content and can manage their land effectively on the basis of their carbon content. One of the things I'm keen, though, on is for us to engage with farmers more effectively to get information back from farmers. Here on the top right-hand side is a combine harvester harvesting during the summer. This combine harvester has on it a GPS positioning system, and it makes a record of the volume of harvest of crop that is coming in for a 10 by 10 metre spatial scale on any given field. Now that is incredibly interesting information for us as crop scientists to say, how do our crops really perform out there in the real world? And this kind of information, when fed back to us, would allow us to look at how our crop yields vary across space, but also within fields, about how those vary in relation to the environmental context that there is within the field. And I would like to see us develop more effective ways of gathering this information from the farming community that are using the crop varieties that we develop. So again, scaling up, we were looking at farms, now we're looking at upland communities, and I'll be moving away here from farmers towards other users of the land within Scotland. So I'm talking more here about the Upland Estates. So there's a lot of change happening in the Upland Estates in Scotland. There's been a substantial reduction in both sheep and cattle numbers in Scotland over the past 10 years. And there's changes in grazing management and grouse management practice that shape the uplands that we know and love within Scotland. So what are the kinds of biodiversity consequences that would happen to that? And we now are having to manage conflicting interests between different neighbours within upland estates, and also between public and private interests on estates as they develop their understanding about how it is that the land can be used most effectively to provide a range of different services, such as obviously tourism, sporting values, and ecosystem goods and services. So one of the things we've been doing is working with deer estates across Scotland to work out how deer management on one estate can affect another. Because deer know no boundaries, they move across estates. The right to shoot a deer is held by the landowner, but they do not have the right to try and herd deer onto to hold deer on their particular ground. So how does private objectives for deer management be incorporated in an integrated way with public objectives, such as the ability to roam on land? So what we've been doing is developing maps which help to inform debates about future land use as part of integrated land use strategies within estates. And here we have an example of a program that we've developed called Deer Map. It's a deer habitat preference model that was developed in collaboration with the estate owners. So the estate owners said what it was that they felt was the ways in which deer used landscapes in relation to geographic features and environmental features, and then these models were then used in order to make predictions about where the change in distribution of deer would be in relation to particular activities. And these maps are now used as ways of catalysing conversations between different estate owners, and also between estate owners and other people that use the land in which, of those estates, to inform how deer management will affect the future shape of Scottish landscapes. So moving on to now at a scale higher than that, up to the level of the catchment. So flood risk management in local catchment areas. As we know, Scotland is somewhere where it rains a lot. There's a lot of water flows through Scotland. There's a lot of flood risk associated with extreme events, and that's likely to increase as climate change impacts. So we've been developing IT solutions to help communities become more aware of flood risks. So we use now websites and webcams to provide local communities with information about hydrological data and the extent of flooding. And we have a range of weather stations now hosted by local primary schools which provide information. So this information is now freely available to local communities to both understand their hydrological system in which they are living, but also to understand the risks that there are associated with flooding. And we're working with those communities now to develop positive catchment actions so that they can more effectively manage their catchments in order to reduce the impacts that there are on floods and on their businesses, particularly in farms. And we're working in a participatory way with communities to develop science and policy needs that are most effective in delivering outcomes for these local communities. One of the examples that we have is we work in partnership with the Catchment Partnership now, and we've been providing information for the Catchment Partnership about identifying hotspots where environmental and public health impacts are likely to be their greatest. And we've had a very successful campaign with the Decatchment Partnership to raise awareness of good septic tank management to reduce the amount of particularly E. coli coming into groundwater in the decatchment area. So this again is another example of the kinds of ways in which we as an organisation are working to deliver our science more effectively to the communities who want the information and need to use it. And finally, one more after this, we create a forum where people can share their concerns and opinions. We have a thing called a virtual landscape theatre, which we have housed in Aberdeen, but it actually can be moved around the landscape, around the country. So we can take the virtual landscape theatre, and on it we project the landscape in which people are living, and then onto that we create different scenarios. For example, a lot of the work we do is with wind farms, where we place wind farms on the landscape, or we put forestry in the landscape, and then we get people's reaction to those changes in the environment in which they are living. And we do that, we've done that, for example, in Birmingham, or done it with local schools in and around the Aberdeen area. And with wind farms, we've been talking, we've used it for the offshore wind farm, which is currently, as you know, causing quite a lot of debate up north. And we've taken it recently to Scottish Parliament for discussions there about the impact that offshore wind farms would have on the visual amenity of the landscape. And these, again, are catalysts. This virtual landscape theatre is a catalyst for conversation around the ways in which Scotland might look in the future, bringing science into the discussions that people have about their preferences for the land of Scotland. And finally, one of our key objectives of the research that we do is provide advice for government. And the government has actually been supporting us recently in the development of a new way of interacting between science and policy. These are called Centres of Expertise. They started on the 1st of April last year. And these Centres of Expertise are to create a world-renowned centre of expertise to deliver objective, independent, integrated and authoritative evidence to the Scottish Government. And there are three new centres of expertise, one on water, one on climate change, and another one on animal disease outbreaks. And these actually have brought together the scientific expertise that there is, not just within the institutes, but also the universities now, to deliver that directly to Scottish Government. So when Scottish Government has a question around the impact of climate change on a particular industry, they can come straight to the scientific community, and the scientific community can draw together their expertise and deliver it back in a timely and effective way to government. So that's a range of different ways that we've been looking at developing how we can improve the impact of our research into business, communities and the government. And I think, as a final slide here, talking about the ways in which we can strengthen our engagement with the rural community, and I think we have to do that. I think science has to play a major part in providing the information that is required by society in order to make a difference to the lives that we lead. I think we as a research organisation, as the James Hutton Institute, we have to link more closely with other institutions doing relevant work, and I think we are part actually of the Edinburgh Consortium for Rural Research because we want to link more closely not just with the main research providers, that's ourselves, Scottish Agriculture College, the Rowett and the Morden, who are funded directly by government, but we also want to work more closely with the universities. And we already have some strong alliances with the universities, particularly University of Dundee and University of Aberdeen, but I think it's important for us as an institute to get more strongly engaged with the universities, and also with other research organisations and researchers, not just within Scotland, but internationally. And I think we also have to increase the effectiveness of our knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer, and I think we have to do that through improving our demonstration platforms, and I talked to you about the Balruddery farm that we have. I think our research stations have to become much more demonstrations of the research that we do that allows people to come and see the new work that is being done and how that can be used on their ground. on their land. I think we also have to engage more strongly, and this is talking about the James Hutton Institute, engage more strongly with a consultant network that is already out there, providing advice and guidance through the support of the Scottish Government to particularly the agricultural sector. The Scottish Agriculture College has a strong consultancy network. We used to have what was called the Scottish system within Scotland, which was that the institutes, in effect, fed through their research into the consultancy network. That actually fell down over the period of the 80s and 80s until now, with Scottish Agricultural College being the main one that can maintain the consultancy services. And we, I think, as an institute, now have to get more fully engaged with those consultants, such that the research that we're doing can actually provide information into those consultants to make a difference to the farming communities. And also, I think that we, as with many, will have to get more effective at the ways in which we use the web and social media to engage more with the community at large and demonstrate the value of the research that we have and the value of information that's held within the public for ourselves. So we also have to develop means to collaborate more effectively with our stakeholders. We've heard about disciplinary research, multidisciplinary research, interdisciplinary research. Well, now we have transdisciplinary research. Transdisciplinary research requires us to bring communities of practice together with researchers in order to be able to do research more effectively. And we have to do what's called co-construction, so that we don't just develop a product and then pass it over to the eagerly awaiting business or broader society, but actually get broader society and businesses engaged with the development of the research that we do from the start. And citizen science is the other one, where we bring the citizens of the country in to more effectively engage with us as a research community. I think finally one of the messages I've been given out for many years is the fact that research institutes like the James Hutton Institute are trying to develop require scientists that are able to work in a transdisciplinary way and are able to work in an applied context. And I think from our point of view, we have 120 PhD students with us. Those PhD students are the lifeblood for the future of the research community, not just in Scotland but internationally. And we are able to provide a training for those students, which means that we have scientists that are fit for purpose for the 21st century. They're ones who are working in an interdisciplinary way, and they're ones that are able to translate their science effectively to the communities of practice. Finally, I'd like to just thank my colleagues who have helped in putting this talk together. And I'm glad to say my voice has managed to keep going, so I'm sure if there are some questions that I'll be able to croak my way through those as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was quite a remarkable, extensive coverage of all the work in terms of research and application that's going on in Scotland in relation to crop production and all the things that influence it. Quite truly remarkable coverage and a really stimulating job that you've come back to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we're going to have the question time. We have two roving microphones, so when you ask your question, please raise your hand and wave it. Yes, I see a willing participant there. But the secret of this is that you should be short and succinct in the question, because if you take 10 minutes, then we don't have many questions from many people. So let's have the first question here.
James Irvin. I'm a farmer in the southern uplands of Perthshire, and I actually would really like to make the point that I think the balance now has gone too strongly in favour of environment and biodiversity, and that balance has to be brought back into a better central position in which the economy of farming in such areas as mine is taken into more serious consideration. And what we actually find is very different, I think, from what you're actually described, but it is a massive bureaucracy which is highly inhibitive. there is no clear direction over the next several years where we're going. We see money actually wasted a great deal in environmental schemes that are short-lived and really not very productive, and actually damaging what the farming in Scotland knows how to do, has done for many generations, and has maintained a good balance between biodiversity and production. So I'd call for a better balance. The other thing I would call for, we don't actually see the application of science coming through clearly enough. There are many examples of this. For example, if we're doing biomass, the new type of grasses that are being done elsewhere in the world, but we're not doing them here because we can't do genetically modified crops. They're banned. Now that is a huge disadvantage. When we come to see disease control, like foot and mouth, this society had a working group on that and spent a lot of effort on it, but we actually haven't moved forward hardly one iota. So that if foot and mouth comes round again, then again it's slaughter, it's not using vaccination, and we're up against the ridiculous idea that vaccinated meat from vaccinated cattle is not edible. Now that's just ridiculous. And there are many ways in which science simply isn't being applied. Tuberculosis in cattle south of the border, yet another example.
Excuse me, I think we've heard a number of points raised there, and you almost proved my point about the 10-minute question.
Yeah, that's right.
So, there's a real challenge to the lecturer from that.
Yeah, I think, and I'll pick up on the second one. I think my view is that in science, part of what we as scientists have to do is try and demonstrate the value of our science more effectively than it has been. The Scottish Government, I have to say, has been very supportive of particularly agricultural research for many years, when many countries divested themselves of investment in agricultural research. And that's why Scotland currently leads the world in terms of agricultural research. The question is how you translate that then into practice. And I think that we have, the thesis I have is that we have to more closely engage with the communities of practice in order to be able to do that. It isn't that we within institutes just conduct our research and expect it then to be taken up by our eagerly awaiting masses. It's actually that we do it in collaboration with the communities that we want to use it for. And that's part of my job, is to try and bring that culture of engagement with the people that are going to be using the research in order to be able to do that effectively. And the Scottish Government, through these new centres of expertise, I think, are taking a step in that direction as far as using evidence which is generated in the research community, and that includes the universities, more effectively in terms of the ways in which policies are developed for water, climate change and animal disease outbreaks. Those centres of expertise will, I think, actually see a step change in the ways in which science engages with policy. But I can come back here in 3 years' time and you can see whether I've done a good job or not.
Yes.
My question is short, but in two parts. If I read correctly, the DTZ figure was for pounds spent, £17 a tonne within the United Kingdom.
Yes, that's right.
How is that broken down between the nations of the United Kingdom, and to what extent is the capacity for export into mainland Europe?
Yeah, I don't have the report on me, so I don't know the extent to which it was broken down into the different countries. All I know is it was 17 across the UK as a whole. We didn't include in that the export, and I think that's one of the areas that we have a lot more opportunities than we've had. We've taken advantage of, let's say. We're currently in discussion with China as a way of increasing our, particularly potato varieties into China. And there's all sorts of issues that are associated with that in terms of intellectual property, etc. But I think that again, I'm going to be parochial, but then internationalise. I think that Scotland has a vast array of quality research within the agricultural community research community that can be exported to deal with a lot of the problems that are faced, particularly in developing countries. And I think we have to be more effective at that. And we have to be more effective, I think, by two things. One is actually exporting our expertise and talents overseas, but actually also engaging with with the international developing countries and educating the scientists for the 21st centuries from those countries in Scotland, and then when they go back to their own countries, they in fact act as ambassadors for us as a country into their own country. So,
Iain, could I just ask, you've talked about exporting your ideas and exporting Scottish products, but the opposite of that is imports. And could you give us an up-to-date view on the balance between the import-export situation in agriculture in Scotland and where we're heading?
I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on the commodity that you talk about. I don't have an exact number about what the relativities are of import and export. I think that there is a drive within Scotland to increase our self-sustainability in particular products, because of the fact that will allow us not to be driven by the consequences of the world market. And I think that, I mean, coming back to the very first point, I think that agricultural production is going to get quite a strong boost within Scotland because of this whole food security issue. So I can't answer your question directly, but I think that there will be a drive towards increasing the amount of food that is produced within Scotland for the Scottish people, rather than necessarily relying on imports.
A question in the centre.
Thank you very much. I'm Denise Walton, organic farmer from Berwickshire.
And I know you. Hello.
Hi.
James Hutton.
How real is sustainable intensification? And is it the right kind of concept to frame research into food security and climate change?
Yeah. I think there's going to be an interesting debate around sustainable intensification, because my view is that there will become a dichotomy within the system between an intensified system that is not sustainable, but is intensified in order to be able to produce food, and then outside that, a sort of sustainable system that is lower production, but integrates more closely more effectively with the environment in which it operates. So I think it's the same, sustainable intensification, I think, is an interesting concept at the moment, but it is one that's up for debate. It's been, John Peddington has been talking about it, among others. So it's there on the table. The question is, can we do it? I think we have to strive to, but if you are asking my opinion, I think we will go towards a route where we have highly intensified system that is not, inverted commas, sustainable, requires a huge amount of input in order to maintain it, and then we'll have large areas which are more sustainable because of the fact that they are much more closely linked in with the environment in which the crop is being produced. I mean, fundamentally, we have to get agriculture more integrated with the environment in which agriculture is occurring, rather than separate it out from the environment which is occurring. That has had a major detrimental impact on agricultural production and our opportunities to sustain the system in the long run.
Question here? Yes?
I wonder, does the Scottish Government encourage or discourage your GM crop research?
The Scottish Government discourages the crop research. Yes, I mean, and again, I'll give you my personal opinion here. So the Scottish Government discourages research on GM crops. I've been asked by the SNP government whether that therefore leads to a brain drain from Scotland around agricultural research, because of the fact that our scientists are not able to do research on genetically modified crops. I do not know of any scientists that's left the institute that I run because of the fact they couldn't do GM research. However, as a scientist, I would say that I think that we as scientists should be able to do research using genetic modification as a means of understanding the system. Only through that can we then make advice and guidance as to the most effective way of using or not GM as a means by which we can increase production. It's going to happen across the globe. Now, for Scotland to say that it doesn't wish to engage in even the research that would underpin that, I think is not sensible.
Next question. Centre.
Peter Fairweather. I wonder if you might like to make a comment about the proposed banning of azulox for bracken eradication.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I don't know enough about it, I'm afraid, to be able to say anything.
Right. Another question.
Could I ask you, in the context of global warming, what new opportunities do you think that offers to Scotland?
I actually I was with Richard Lochhead at dinner on Thursday night, and I pointed out the fact that we've just completed some research using the land capability for agriculture data that we have, which suggests that within the next 40 years, because of climate change, so basically the current scenarios for Scotland are that there will be more rain in the winter, and it'll be warmer during the summer. The expectation we have is that there will be an increase in prime agricultural land in Scotland over the next 40 years of 40%. So 1,800 square kilometres of land, which is currently not viable for crop production, will come into crop production over the next 40 years. That is a substantial increase, as you can imagine. And that, again, offers an opportunity for Scotland, but we have to work out exactly how we take it. One of the arguments I've had is that if you look at the climate change scenarios as far as changes in land capability is concerned, much of that land is currently in marginal land, which is currently used for sheep and livestock production. That is the kind of land which is currently being looked at for woodland expansion. So if we look then at that land, if you move it into woodland, then what happens in terms of 40 years as far as your ability to use it for crops is concerned if you've put trees on it. So I think, I think there's a lot of interesting debates going to happen over the next couple of years anyway as to how it is we use land in Scotland, particularly in relation to the climate debate. Mitigation with tree planting, adaptation with changes in land capability for agriculture.
Can we just tease that out a little? You started your talk, Iain, by talking about the extremes and the effect of extremes of flooding, of drought, and of bushfires and so on around the world. And you've just told us that nature is going to smile in Scotland. And we're going to have limitless new productivity. Can you just explain how we manage to avoid the extremes?
I don't know if you can avoid the extremes. I mean, those extremes happen. I think again it comes down to using science as a way of making predictions about what will happen in the future in terms of the scenarios that there's likely to be. And the other thing is to think about not just what the average increase will be, but also what the variation around that average will be. So you can then develop means by which you can mitigate or adapt to the extreme events. One of the things that we're not sure about at the moment is in terms of extreme events and how those are likely to affect particularly the rainfall that happens during the winter period. Because obviously from a cropping perspective, a lot of the actual agronomic activity happens during the winter.
Absolutely.
And if you can't get your tractor onto the ground to do the agronomic activity, then you can't benefit from the warmer weather during the summer. So, are we going to have to change the ways in which we improve the technologies by which we plough the land or we get access to the land in order to be able to seed it during the winter time when the ground is wetter?
Okay, next question. Yes, at the very back. There's a microphone coming.
Yes, the sea plays a pretty important part in the vast majority of Scotland's rural areas. Have you got any interest in maritime matters?
Well, as I showed you in the slide of me and the fish, so I personally have a lot of interest in maritime matters. We do a lot of research on freshwater catchment management. Obviously, freshwater flows from the land into the sea, and we have a program of research that is called Catchments and Coasts, because of the fact that there is a linkage between the land and the sea. I think that we need, talking again about the James Hutton Institute, I think we have to more effectively engage with our partners in SAMS and also in Marine Scotland to look at, and they with us obviously, in order to look at the ways in which land management affects the coastal system and the marine system in Scotland. Now, Sir John said that I spent time in Australia working for ECRR. One of the programs of research that I ran was called Ridge to Reef, which was on the eastern seaboard of Australia, looking at ways in which you could change land management practice in order to protect the Great Barrier Reef in the face of climate change. Because whilst most scientists were pushing for reducing the amount of greenhouse gas that was produced in order to protect the reef from ocean acidification and from sea surface temperature rise. Actually, there's a lot of work you could do on the land to change fertilizer inputs, the amount of sediment and nutrient runoff that was happening from agricultural practice to protect the Great Barrier Reef. So, that's my background, and I would like to see the same idea coming into the Scottish context to link between land management and what happens in our coasts and marine areas.
Right. Any other questions? Yes. On the right.
Hello, thank you. It's similar to the previous question about maritime, but my question is about forestry, which covers 18% of the Scottish land surface and has barely had a mention this evening.
Yeah.
The Scottish Government wants to encourage 10,000 hectares of new planting every year. How do we balance that with this apparent increase in Scottish agricultural protectionism? You know, why is food security important and timber security isn't important?
Yeah. I think actually I gave a bit of an answer to that in the issue I was talking about earlier on. Clearly the Scottish Government I think was very, very far-sighted in terms of the development of the Climate Change Act and then the associated land use strategy that has been linked to that. There is a push to increase forestry to 25% cover, but you have to ask whereabouts exactly is that going to happen and what are the trade-offs that there are between that and everything else. Now, I'm not saying that therefore agriculture should have precedent over forestry, but you have to at least look at why it is you're making the decision about the ways in which land are used, because nearly all of the land we have has multiple opportunities for the ways in which it's used. And I think we have to be very clear about how we can use scientific information to inform about the trade-offs that there are about a decision you make about the way in which you use land for its ability to provide ecosystem services now, but also in the future. So,
ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to begin to call this to an end because we have to respect that Iain's voice is held up very well so far. But I think it's becoming more baritone by the moment.
Thank you.
So could we ask Professor Jeremy Bradshaw to come and present a vote of thanks to Iain.
Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you will already know, the annual Peter Wilson Lecture is a joint venture hosted by the Edinburgh Consortium for Rural Research, the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and the Society of Biology. We've already heard about Peter Wilson's achievements here at the Royal Society of Edinburgh and with the Edinburgh Consortium for Rural Research. He also found time to be Vice President of the Institute of Biology, and on another occasion, General Secretary of the Institute of Biology. And this was at a time when the Institute was gaining its Royal Charter. The Institute of Biology 3 years ago became the Society of Biology, and it now has over 80,000 members around the country. It's on behalf of those 80,000 members that I'm standing here, and on behalf of them, but particularly on behalf of the people seated here and in the Overspill Lecture Theatre next door, that it gives me great pleasure to thank Iain Gordon for a wonderful, informative and thought-provoking lecture, and for some excellent answers to some rather tricky questions. Please join me in thanking him.